Hello, this is Josh Bycer from GameWisdom.com. Hope you enjoy this video. Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of Game Wisdom Live, the only video game show starring me, unfortunately. We have a great video or great show for you tonight. Obviously we are streaming this live on YouTube. I have to pull up the stream here. And as you notice, we have guests to my stage left. I'm not sure. One of these days I will learn these positionings. But let's welcome them on. First, my contributor to Game Wisdom and co-host for these shows, James Elby.
Howdy, guys.
James, it's great to have you on, and everyone can see us now.
Yeah, we can see our lovely, handsome faces.
And our special guest this week from psychologyofgames.com, please welcome Jamie Madigan.
Hey, everybody. How's it going?
Jamie, it's great to have you on for tonight's show. We're going to be spending a good portion of it talking about the psychology behind monetization and DLC elements, which I know you definitely have focused a lot on psychological motivators for game design and mechanics in the past.
Yeah, cool.
For anyone watching this live right now, I have the YouTube stream up in my little corner here, so if you have any questions, be sure to leave them in chat. Let me just get this all organized there. And for those of you watching this, either live or recorded, if you would like to be on one of these episodes of Game Wisdom Live as a guest, be sure to let me know. We're always looking for new developers or people to talk to. Alright, so before we get going, as always with Game Wisdom Live, we'll do a brief recap of the week and what's been going on here. So unfortunately, no new Patreon subscribers at this time. I've done some updates to the site or to the page. There are some special early bird rewards now up, and I figure we're going to keep the early bird discounts available up until the end of October, since I started this in mid-September. So if you would like to support Game Wisdom and would like to get a little discount, be sure to check out the Patreon. You can find me on there under Game Wisdom. In terms of YouTube subscribers, we are getting up there. We are right now at, as of this stream, 684 subscribers. So,
Woo!
Nice.
Thank you so much for following us here. As I've said with the recent critical thoughts, if once we get to 700, I have a little treat plan for the next video playlist on the channel. So be sure to tell your friends and let them all know to subscribe, hopefully. Other than that, hopefully I'll have some good news in terms of some side projects I'm working on in the near future. But as I say, any help with the Patreon would be greatly appreciated. I've updated things with simply like the bare minimum in terms of just paying monthly expenses. And that is a pretty big deal goal to hit. If we can hit that, that would certainly mean a lot and help ease some of the burden here. So please share with your friends and let everybody know. But enough about the administrative stuff. Let's talk about some of the big posts or the things I've talked about on Game Wisdom this week. So first thing we had was the Kickstarter for the game Woven. And have you guys heard of this one?
No, I haven't, no.
It's a game that's supposed to be all done like yarn aesthetic. And you basically have this character, Stuffy, who's a plush elephant. And you have to scale him through this world, and you can basically mix and match different arms and legs to give him like unique powers and stuff. It sounds very interesting. From the interview that I had with the developer, it seems very much like a passion project for them in order to make something of this kind of style and design.
Yeah, it seems like there's been a few games lately that came out. Wasn't there one from
Kirby's Yarn.
or Kirby's Epic Yarn and something
Yarn.
from Ubisoft, like Unraveled or Unraveled?
Unraveled, yeah.
Yeah, same sort of aesthetic. So maybe that's the new zombies.
Yeah.
Although I feel like we're getting like a trickle of those kind of games, so we're not stale of them just yet. Like I think another Yarn game as far as I know, the Kirby's Epic Yarn game like really took off. Like it had a really
Hmm?
good sales,
Hmm.
and I think that might lead some more people to go maybe looking and fishing for the indie kind of crafty games. If you want to, you know what I mean, where they're made out of like everyday craft materials.
Felt and pipe cleaners and
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, that kind of stuff. Yeah, you almost feel like you're in kindergarten again. That's kind of cool.
Yeah,
Yeah.
my daughters and I played a lot of Kirby's Epic Yarn out when it
Mhm.
came out. So
Yeah.
that was a good one.
So right now, I just pulled up their Kickstarter. They're about halfway done, and they just hit over $20,000, but they need about 75,000 more.
Mm.
So we'll see what happens. There's always the chance of that last minute bump from the last minute Kickstarter push, but we'll see what happens. They have a really interesting number of physical rewards. They have obviously like plush animals. One of the characters will show up, and it sounds like a really good idea. I'm just wondering how they're doing in terms of getting the word out for it. Now, the other bit of news that I talked about this week, if I was smart enough to keep Game Wisdom open at the time, which I had switched off just to check a look at the Kickstarter,
Oops.
was the look at Rive. And Rive is the final game from developer Two Tribes. And Two Tribes has been around for quite a while. They make a number of puzzle-based games. There was Toki Toki, which I think is probably one of their most recognizable games because I've seen it like publicized on like almost every platform. I think. And I know I asked you this before the caching, but you haven't really heard of Two Tribes before, right?
No, I haven't
Uh,
heard of that one. Toki Toki rings a bell.
Mm-hmm.
Is that Panic Toki Toki or is that something else?
That may be something else. It's like
Okay.
starring like a yellow chicken who has to solve puzzles and rescue his family.
oh yeah,
Uh,
yeah. I've seen pictures of that as well. Yeah.
Yeah, and they've been, I think, doing okay for themselves. Again, I don't have any first-hand experience or first-hand talking to them, but they've been, again, they've been around for I think over a decade at this point. So
mm,
Rive is going to be their final game, and from looking at what's made them famous, it's a complete departure from their other titles. It's a pure throwback to action games. Arena battling, lots of enemy waves, explosions all over the place, stuff like that.
Yeah, yeah. I'm looking at the trailer right now on PSN. It's out on PSN.
Yeah.
hmm.
And it's surprisingly a great game. Like, normally when we see like an indie developer focus on one particular genre or design, it's just that's sort of like what's going to be their core. Like, they're not going to deviate from that. And for being a puzzle developer for all this time, Rive is a really great action game. It is a bit on the short side, but from a mechanics point of view, it wasn't that bad.
It looks like if Super Meat Boy and Metal Slug had a baby. I'm serious. Like it's that fast pace. Oh my god, everything in the world is trying to kill me, but also, oh wait, I have guns.
Hmm.
Yeah. I was just watching the trailer. Like, yeah, Super Meat Boy meets Metal Slug. I like that.
Someone
Those are
to
two good things.
someone to email Two Tribes at it. Someone let them know we just came with their new marketing pitch for the game.
Uh,
And I want to. I'm curious to see what this will do for them as a studio because they announced that this was going to be their last game. I remember hearing about it like 2-3 months ago when they were first starting to release news about Rive. So I'm
Mm.
curious to see if this will change anything or if this will really be their last game or not.
So what are they moving on to, if anything?
I think the studio is just closing.
Oh, really? That's a
oh,
bummer.
Yeah. And it always sucks when we hear that about studios closing, people moving on, stuff like that.
Yeah, especially one of these that's been around for a while, even if they've just been kind of, quietly plugging away and releasing smaller games. That's the world needs those as well. So that's a
Hmm.
bummer.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Now, the other post we made, which is the post I made this week, was talking about boss fight designs. And this is the part one of two. So boss fight design is one of those very interesting topics I made a critical thought about the other day, and it's really one of the things that we've seen such a variety of it. And I guess here's a question for both of you: have you played any games with like non-traditional boss fights? I'm talking like a boss in a puzzle game or a boss in a racing game, something where we
Hmm.
normally don't have a boss section.
Wow.
Yes.
Hmm.
What's that?
I play one of my older favorite games is a game called Carmageddon,
Hmm.
Carpocalypse Now. It
Remember
was the
that?
second installment of Carmageddon for the PC, and I think it was after the third or fourth race where it's usually just regular cars that you're just racing against, different types of cars, but twisted metal like esque cars.
Hmm.
Wait, although this came way before twisted metal. Um, you got to a stage where there was a giant dump truck, like it was a giant dump truck. I mean, like this thing was the size of like six of your cars, and it even had its own lane, and it was in the starting lane for the for the race. But and keep in mind, it didn't really. It's not that it changed the mechanics at all,
Hmm.
specifically for the boss fight. It was just one of those you're used to fight racing and crashing into each other like dirt derby
Hmm.
style of regular cars, just like you. And it really was a boss fight in the fact that like this was a freaking dump truck like that was the size of like a house that was like it could still race, and you had to like you either had to beat it in the race or you had to destroy everybody on the field to be the last one standing. So this dump truck basically said, "Well, you're not destroying me, so you better beat me in the race." Like
Hmm.
it was a really interesting. You wouldn't think that a car game, like a racing destruction derby game, would have this kind of boss esque monster, or well, car monster truck car thing. So it was really interesting.
I
I
remember.
hated it.
I remember the game Catherine for the
Right.
PS3, Xbox. Did you play Catherine?
I didn't, but I think I watched some Let's Plays of it,
Hmm.
if I recall correctly.
What about
Same
you,
here.
James?
Same here. I was going through a bad breakup at the time with a girl named Catherine. So when the game when the game
Yeah, Catherine was a puzzle game. It's
came
all
about,
about,
but no, I did see a lot of videos. I did see a lot of videos about it.
and it's a puzzle game where you're trying to get up a tower by moving the blocks in and out. And what they did is, like at the end of each chapter, you have a boss section where the guy's basically chased by a fear, a nightmare version of his fear, and it basically messes with the tower or messes with your controls or stuff like that. And it just like is a way of adding a little bit more flair and variety to the game. But when it comes to boss design, as I said in my post, there's a lot of different ways you can approach it, and there's a lot of interesting examples of good and bad boss designs. So I guess a question for both of you is: do you have an example of a boss fight that you really enjoyed, and one that you just hated? You were just glad it was over.
Yeah, I mean, I think about even kind of related to the question you were asking earlier about non-traditional boss fights.
Hmm.
Some of the ones that stick out to me are games where you might expect to have like a boss fight, like a role-playing game, but then it gives you like some really weird options for handling that boss fight,
Hmm.
including like being able to talk your way through, the boss fight. Like some of the original Deus Ex boss fights, when if you had the right dialogue tree, you could just like talk Gunter into killing himself or like shutting down. And
Hmm.
like Fallout New Vegas, where it was if you had a high enough speech ability, you could um, like talk one of the final bosses into just like turning around and walking away and convincing him that it's not worth fighting. Whereas if you didn't go those paths, then you would have a much more traditional, boss fight on your hands. So I always think that that's kind of cool and that's kind of interesting.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, I think one of the game series that's always done boss fights really well to the point where it's almost the entire point of the game is like the Dark Souls and the Souls games, where
Hmm.
most of those boss fights are really memorable and really fun. There's a few that are just like super hard or frustrating, like a lot of things in those games. But I tend to remember a lot of those boss fights.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Dark Souls and the Soul series in general is a really good example of having some really fantastic boss designs because they're always very unique in how you approach them. You can't fight Gundyr the same as you would.
Mm.
Um, wow, all the names have just left me.
That one guy
Pontiff.
with the big sword, yeah.
One guy with a big sword. I think that just described 40 bosses right there.
Ornstein and Smo
Oh,
from
yes.
Man.
Dark Souls is probably one of the most memorable battles of the Soul franchise.
Mhm.
And a lot of other games, you would fight one boss, you would fight bosses back to back, but this was one of those where you're fighting two heavily. It almost is three boss fights in one because you have to worry about the two of them individually, and then you also have to. And then once you manage to get one down, the other one goes to full health and gets bigger and stronger.
Oh, yeah.
So it's like it is such a wonderfully tiered, and it is a gear for all intents and purposes. It's a gear check boss. It really is. There's no like deep detailed story as to why you're fighting these people. I mean, there's speculations, but nothing apparent in the game. But it is a wonderful gear check. It's a beautiful, memorable. I mean, to the point where you have memes online about Snorlax and Pikachu, and they have the pictures of Ornstein and Smo, the big guy with the huge ham Jesus maker with the hammer, and then the smaller knight with the traditional knight with the spear of lightning and stuff. And, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a good one.
Another good example that I talked about in the Critical Thought was the Metal Gear series,
Yeah.
who's always seems to have really good boss fights, not just from a design point of view, but usually from like a lore or background point of view.
Uh-huh.
And you see this with, of course, Metal Gear Solid 3. At some point, I need to play Phantom Pain. I have not played MGS5 yet.
It's supposed to be really good. I have a
That's-
friend of mine who's a huge fan.
That's like the only Metal Gear game that I have played to any degree.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and I liked it a lot. That Metal Gear is completely impenetrable for me. Just the story and the lore and like what's going on, and Metal Gear 5 wasn't any different. Like I didn't have any clue what was happening, but I sure had a lot of fun with it.
Yeah, and it's really interesting about. Again, we could probably dedicate an hour to something about Metal Gear in and of itself. But one thing I've always found fascinating about Metal Gear is how it really has become like its own genre in a sense, with like the variety of mechanics in these games, the types of bosses you fight, and of course the whole cinematic side. Like you really don't see other games like Metal Gear Solid, and they really have taken that design with each game and changed things. Like with Metal Gear 5, I know from playing Peace Walker on the PSP. Have you played either? You played that one?
Mm-mm.
I haven't played 5, but I have played Peace Walker. I had a PSP, and I was in love with my PSP for the longest time. So.
What did you think of Peace Walker?
I keep in mind it was a while ago, so I honestly don't. I loved the like card system esque upgrading system. Like I thought it was real, and the cinematic almost like what was it, Frank Miller kind of cinematic way of telling the story was really cool. Yeah, it was a good. But keep in mind, I was not also a diehard. I wasn't a diehard Metal Gear fan at that time. I mean, a fan, but not diehard. So it was one of those I couldn't. I feel like Metal Gear, and I understand what you were saying, Jamie, is that like Metal Gear is one of those games where you will get 90% more out of it if you're a diehard fan already.
Yeah.
And if you're not, you're kind of like, oh, this is kind of like a more rugged James Bond. That's cool, I guess. You know what I mean? Yeah.
Like even before I went into 5, I like read a bunch of like wikis and like story summaries, and I was after a point I was like, okay, whatever. I'm just gonna sneak around and stab dudes and have fun with it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I've played, I think, almost every Metal Gear game, but yeah, the large story of itself, I've stopped trying to understand that. Like Metal Gear 4, no, I've very little idea what actually happened in that game.
Yeah.
But it's very interesting.
So do the people who made it, probably. I'm guessing.
Yeah.
But yeah, Metal Gear's a really good example of some good boss fights. I've played. It's kind of interesting. It's hard to remember some of, like, the poor boss fights because you try
Oh,
to block
good.
them out a lot of times.
Well, but you do have to mention the two, like, for me personally, the two biggest Metal Gear fights as far as like game design and mechanics go
Mm-hmm.
are the one with Psycho Mantis
Mm-hmm.
on the PlayStation 1, which
Mm.
freaked everybody out. Like, I don't care
Oh,
who
is that the
you
one where he
were.
made your controller
Mm-hmm.
rumble? And
Well, not just that. It was the mechanic. He starts off like lore wise as he's taunting you for the for the big battle ahead. He starts talking to you, the player. He breaks the fourth wall. Starts talking to you, the player, about your save files
Yes.
on your memory card. So he's like, "Oh, you only have 36% on Castlevania,
Yeah.
I see," and you're like,
It's like, what?
what?" And like he's a psychic, so you can't actually beat him because and it's funny because every gamer's worst nightmare is, oh, they know what I'm gonna do before I do it because they know the controllers. Psycho Mantis literally does know your controllers, and they
Mm-hmm.
literally had the program of obviously they read the input of whatever you put left or right, and he just counters it mechanically. So you
Mm-hmm.
cannot beat him if your control. The way you have to beat him is you have to take your controller out of slot one and put it into slot two, so he
wow.
can't read your motions. Fuck you, like freaked everybody out, but also a groundbreaking moment in video game history. And then there was a thing for I think in Metal Gear Solid Snake Eater, the end,
Mm-hmm.
the old sniper. And one of the big things with Metal Gear Solid 3 was the whole time system, and it kept track of how many hours you played, and even would tell you to turn the game off and get rest. The end was this really old sniper who did stuff with bees, and you can engage him story wise. The last boss, you engage him story wise. Spoilers, people, sorry. And you can engage him just like any other boss, and you have this huge sniper battle, and whoop de doo. Or because the game recognizes hours and time, if you set your clock 3 days ahead, like basically advance 3 days time, when you actually meet for the boss
What?
fight, for the end, he dies of old age. You never fight him. You never have to. He literally, you find his corpse and he's just dead because the game, like,
That
groundbreaking game
that is
boss battle stuff.
that is pants on head crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think that's how you can describe all the Metal Gear games right there. Yeah. Now, in terms of, like, annoying or bad boss fights, not limited to Metal Gear, but games in general, are there any bad memories of, like, a boss that just pissed you off to, like, no end fighting?
I think anytime it's just a big bullet sponge,
Mm-hmm.
that's really annoying. But I'm having trouble coming up with specific examples of that.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the later enemies in like Uncharted, was it two or three that just kind of got like that. I can't recall any specific boss fights. I'm not sure that game actually had boss fights. But that's never a good sign. I think the best ones are ones that require you to either use like gear or abilities or just player skills that you've
Mm-hmm.
built up along the way,
Yeah.
that sort of lead you along, a breadcrumb trail of like, okay, you've got this weapon and you've got this ability, and now you can do the air dash, or like the Legend of Zelda is like, oh, you got a boomerang, now you're gonna have to use the boomerang to beat this dungeon boss or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Ones that are really clever about doing that and let you go about it in a new way that is builds on what you've done before is a lot of fun.
Yeah. And I think that's a really good point, one that I talked about it should, like, test the player on something. It should elevate something or challenge them to do something else. I think it was one of the things that really pissed off a lot of people about the bosses in Deus Ex Human Revolution, at
Yeah.
least the original version. I know when they did the
They
director's
patched
cut.
it. Yeah.
And as you were just saying, Jamie, they're pretty much just like bullet sponge fights. How many bullets can you put into the guy before he hits you like 4 or 5 times?
Hmm.
And it just really annoyed a lot of people, especially if your whole game is about choice. And I know, like, the final boss, I think, had I'm trying to remember. I thought like you could hack the final boss, or you could like do something to mess with the final boss. But it's been a while since I played that one.
Yeah, the trick in that was to get the Typhoon ability,
Mm-hmm.
which is like this super attack, and
Mm-hmm.
you just run up directly to the boss and use the Typhoon, and then run away, and then run up to him. That worked on like every boss in that game, and that was sort of the commonly known like way to cheese your way through those boss fights
Mm-hmm.
That's
that
bad.
that got around. Yeah, I mean, and you felt really lame for doing it, but
Mm-hmm.
after a point, man,
Well,
you're just like,
but
I just want to move on.
yeah, I mean, I more blame. I hate to say, but I blame the developer for that. You shouldn't have a
Hmm.
boss
Mm-hmm.
that's an option. You know what I mean? Like
Yep, totally.
a boss is literally supposed to be. For me, I always thought bosses were supposed to like. I love how you said it. They're either supposed to be a gear check to test your progression and how far you progressed, a skill or a skill base. So you basically checking how far you
Mm-hmm.
have learned the mechanics up to this point, and are ready for new mechanics or or just harder bosses. Or it's a story one, or it's a story mission where
Mm-hmm.
sometimes there are bosses who are just for story. It's their job to
Yeah.
propel the story forward.
I guess here's a
And
question. Oh, go ahead. Were you saying something, Jimmy?
I was just gonna say there's kind of another type that you can add on to that, which is like a build check. And I always think of like the Final Fantasy and JRPG bosses, like they weren't necessarily like a test of your skill in playing the game because you were still like just kind of selecting things from menus, but it was more a test of like, have you configured your party correctly? Do you have
Okay.
like the right
Yeah.
players, and do you have like the right gear equipped, and do you have the
Yeah.
right spells memorized when you
Yeah.
go in? And so the boss fights were more an expression of like all the preparation you had done up
Yeah.
to that point. And you always have the
Pokemon did
option
it
to go
too.
back and like grind your
Yeah.
way up and train new skills if you need to.
Yeah. Pokemon is also big for that too. Pokemon is
Yeah.
basically
Mm-hmm.
it's Final Fantasy for children. And that's what it was. That's literally what it was. Actually, if you want to talk about boss fights, story wise, that was one of the best. The original Red and Blue, the fight the Elite Four, which everybody knows in if anybody that played Final Fantasy in the 90s and the 80s, you knew that Final Fantasy always has the series of four boss fights at the end, and they're the your final bosses, and Pokemon did that to mirror that, and then afterwards, spoiler alert, if anybody, everybody knows this now, but your rival, you didn't like, you're literally like, oh, I beat the four people, I'm good, my team's good, we won, we're the champion now. Nope. You have to fight your rival from the beginning of the game. Dun dun dun. You're like, no, and he has like all this stuff like it's counter to you, and it was wonderful, and it was more story wise than it was like mechanics or gear check, because if you had gotten that far, obviously you had the gear. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
All right. Now, my question for both you: we've seen examples of games very rarely that are just strictly all boss fights. Stuff like Shadow of the Colossus, Super Punch Out, No More Heroes, and
Monster Hunter.
recently Fury that just came out like earlier this year. For those types of games, what do you think about games that are just entirely boss fights, where there really isn't anything else per se? And even Cuphead in its original form, before they decided to expand, was going to
Right.
be nothing but boss fight encounters.
I think it goes probably a lot to the just the quality of those encounters.
Mm-hmm.
Something like Shadow of the Colossus, like it was great because each one of the boss fights was like different enough and required you to do different things. It was it was different encounter, and they were sort of spaced out where you had to, if I remember correctly, it's been a while, but you had to like go find them and like travel around this big environment. So it wasn't just like constant, like
Mm-hmm.
fight, boss, boss, boss. There was a little bit of downtime and a little bit of chance for your emotions to reset down to normal and your
Mm-hmm.
expectations to back down to normal. Um, but I think having those kind of games, you miss out on the idea of like a strong progression.
Mm-hmm.
Where you're not like grinding the trash mobs or doing story beats or these optional side kind of quests to feel like, yeah, I'm ready to like
Mm-hmm.
choose to tackle the next boss. You kind of lose some of that sense of progress, which a lot of people like.
Yeah, and I think the other part of that is the actual mechanic or character progression that's missing as
Mhm.
well. Because if you get stuck at a boss like that, there's nothing you can do to get around it. Like, you either are going to learn that fight, or you're basically going to be stuck there until you decide to stop playing.
Yeah, like Shadow of the Colossus, there was very little you could do to improve your character. I think like if you found like the salamanders, your grip
Yeah.
strength improved or something like that. But for the most part, you're using the same moves. Um, this your character was the same on the first boss and the last.
Yeah. From chat, we got some folks from where I post on Kotaku Gaming. Indigo Reviews says, haven't found any good ones in recent years for all boss battles. Again, if you haven't looked at Fury, that would be a good one. It is based again on one mechanic, but if you like action games, it was really good. And Kotaku Bono or Nathan, I know him from who we've talked on the podcast a few weeks ago. Still, his favorite was Shadow of the Colossus, and Shadow of the Colossus was really good. I think, and we're still waiting for the name that I've completely forgot. What was it? The Last Guardian?
The Last Guardian. Yep.
Yeah,
Ah.
that's not a real thing. That's yeah.
Oh come on! Just because we've seen it. We've seen it.
There's
Now,
footage.
smoke
It's
and mirrors.
it's all mirrors.
It's better than it's better than what is it? What is everyone waiting for the third Half-Life? It's better than Half-Life.
Half-Life
So I'll
That is
take it.
true. There's actual footage of the Last Guardian.
Yeah.
But yeah, at some point, maybe when we've all been replaced by robots, Half-Life 3 will come out. Or maybe when Deus Ex actually happens in real life, when we have our AUG mods attached, we'll just download Half-Life 3 to our cerebral cortex.
Yeah. Now that's just sort of my running joke is that the Last Guardian is not real and will never come out, and I will believe that it is a real thing when I can buy it on a store shelf. Prove me wrong.
Uh,
1 second, I'm just making a quick note on Twitter, let people know about our big topic that's going to be coming up in a few minutes. There we go.
Titans, isn't there a game called Titan Souls? Isn't that all boss?
Yes.
Yeah, that's
And, like,
fairly recent, right?
yeah, I know that it came out at least a year or two ago. And
Oh, that old? Okay.
I
Yeah.
played that. It was an okay game. It had a very interesting twist that everyone only has one health. So
Yeah,
you
yeah.
have to get the perfect hit on the boss for he just like any hit from the boss will kill you kind of
Yeah,
thing.
but it's equal. It's basically like the great
Mhm.
equal. You take one shot, you're you take one shot, you're
Mhm.
dead. But if you hit the boss in the right spot, he's dead
Mm.
instantly.
Yeah.
So
Now,
I thought it was really unique.
Now, speaking about good boss fights or interesting boss fights, I think there's one game everyone who's watching this, either live or record, will yell at us if we don't mention, and that'll probably be Undertale from earlier. I think it was earlier this year. Again,
It was
dates,
last year, I think.
dates and release dates are completely unknown to me at this point. So it's all one big blur of games. I mean, at some point, I mean, I'm literally playing Shadows of Mordor for the first time like
Oh,
last
jealous.
night. So at some point, I'll get around these games, or the world will end. I think I think the world ending will happen before I can play all these games I have.
I wish I could go back and play Shadow of Mordor for the first time. That was fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was.
And Undertale, I think when we were talking about earlier with like a story or a narrative point of view, Undertale I think has that in spades. And what you were saying earlier, Jane, with having the different options, you can of course either kill all the bosses or you reason with them all. And I thought what was really good about the game was it had different challenges for each. If you were going to fight the bosses, they would respond one way. If you wanted to talk to the bosses, they'll respond another way. So it's not like technically there is a good and a bad way for playing it, but it's not like a lot of choice-driven games where the good way is always going to be the easiest, and or the good way will always give you the most experience. Stuff like
Yes.
that in BioShock or Knights of the Old Republic, I think did something similar. It just basically said you can do
Yeah.
what you want, and then the game will basically wait till the end to, I guess, give you final judgment. Now, one thing that's actually quite interesting about Undertale, and for those of you watching this, record or live, I want to get your thoughts on this too. Did you do the genocide ending in Undertale, or do you know what we're talking about?
So I didn't play the game, but I watched my daughter play through most of it, and she did both. So she did, I think, the pacifist, or
Mm-hmm.
the don't kill anybody option first,
Mm-hmm.
and then she went through and was the genocidal maniac, just to kind of see both sides of it and see all the content. So
What about you, James? Did you see or play Undertale?
I've only seen it. I haven't actually got a chance to play
Uh,
it. I don't think it's out yet for PS4, and that'd be the only platform that I think we'll be able to play it on. So,
if
which is
you
which is sad because I think the PS4. I think they would take. I think it would do really well on PS4s.
if you haven't, it's one of those things that it's hard to talk about without you actually seeing it, but at the same time, if I say it,
Yeah,
it's
yeah. I get it.
spoiling it basically.
Yeah.
But if you play, I'm not going to spoil this for the cast or the live play, but if you do the genocide route, there's two bosses that basically become, oh my god, insane battles of absolute insanity. And the brilliant part, it fits into the lore. These characters are basically going all out to stop you. So they're basically pulling out all the stops to, take you out, which means fighting their uber extreme forms, which I thought was a
Oh.
really great touch.
Mhm.
But yeah, if you have no, for those of you watching this, if you have no intent on playing Undertale, at least watch the Genocide Run differences, because it's really like a completely different game. But let's move on. We are, I think, not counting the 5-6 minutes we spent trying to get the video and everything working, which I think we got it as good as it's going to be. We'll see what happens. We do have a main topic to talk about, and why I want to have Jamie on. And that is once again going back to the topic of game pricing and basically its impact on the consumer or the perception of these kinds of value. Oh, from Chad Kutaki says he'll play Undertale after The Witcher 3, so that's about 4 years from
yeah.
now. Yeah. Yeah, we'll get there eventually. I still need to play The Witcher 2 at some point, actually sit through that whole game. So someday, and maybe at some point we'll look at No Man's Sky. Who knows when that will happen? But our main topic regarding game pricing and the value. This is part of the critical thought I put up earlier this week, and it's part of my post about the ugly truth of game pricing. And in that piece, I talked about how there's this perception that games should be getting cheaper. Things should be going down at some point. They shouldn't be getting more expensive to play. And that perception of value for the consumer, I think, is a very interesting topic and one that I'm sure you've probably spent some time looking at yourself, Jamie.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not an economist
Mm-hmm.
or a marketing guy, but it seems like there's just a lot more like options that cover the entire gamut from your AAA, $60 games, which have been $60 for a good long time now. That's sort of been like the top, ceiling of game prices, barring like special editions and so forth. Down to free to play games that you can play and get a lot of value out of for nothing.
Yeah.
And it seems to be like there's a lot of things at those two ends, and there's not a whole lot that's kind of in the middle in the like 20, 30, $40 range, except for like AAA games that then go on sale so many months later,
Yeah.
which is generally how I buy games. There's very few releases throughout the year that I will buy on day one and spend full price on, just because my time is more limited than anything else.
Yeah, and I think that's a part of that big discussion about the value. I know Valve, I keep bringing this up, but such a good thing they did was had a presentation about Team Fortress 2 and how consumers will value time or money
Yeah.
in different amounts. And I'm with you as well, Jamie. I got time, I just don't have a lot of money at the moment. So I'd rather wait for these games to be on sale where I can, buy them at my leisure for 20, $30 or less rather than spend full price on a game because I'm just overloaded at the moment. But, go
Yeah.
ahead.
I just whenever somebody says like, "Oh, this game is like only like 3 hours long," I'm like, that's when my ears perk up nowadays. Because if you tell me it's a good game that's like 3 hours long, then suddenly I'm interested, and I would rather experience that than say, like The Witcher 3, which is a great game, but it's going to take you 100+ hours
Yeah.
to see all of it.
Yeah. And this is definitely going to be big. This is in of itself its own topic. I think it's one we actually talked about on the Perceptive podcast. I think maybe the last time you were on or the time before, but
Mhm.
also that difference in time. That if a game has like a short barrier of entry or doesn't take long to get into, it seems that players are willing to go the long run with that compared to a game that has, 50, 60 hours of gameplay you're going to have to experience.
Mhm.
I know for me, it's a lot of the same thing. Like, I don't have like 5, 6 hours to commit to decide if I'm going to like a game. If a game doesn't hook me within like the first 20, 30 minutes,
Right.
it's going to go, in the pile. That ever amalgamous mash of games that's going to overtake me at some point.
Yeah, it just kind of comes down to like, is the game respectful of your time
Yeah.
and assume that you will spend it well, or does it have you go through a really lengthy like build up phase or tutorial, or does it make you do grindy missions that
Yeah.
are just not
Yeah.
fun, or are you doing the same thing over and over again, or does it lock like upgrades behind challenges or missions that are just not fun to do?
Yeah.
Then I'm not going to have a lot of patience for it.
hmm Now, here's one of the questions I want to ask both of you, and this one I'm going to ask to James. I know we talked about a lot of the games you play. I know you were big on Plants vs Zombies, Garden Warfare.
Yeah.
So my question for you is: have you ever bought pure aesthetic items for any games you've played? So, like Team Fortress 2 hats, or
Hmm.
something that doesn't serve a gameplay purpose.
Yes. Yes, I have. Um, Smite is again, it's basically it's Smite console MOBA. Basically, Smite console MOBA. I bought stuff on there. I bought stuff on uh, Planet Side 2. I bought
hmm
an armor thing that and okay. So, yes, you're asking me if I've done that. Yes, I have.
Okay. By the way, you're coming in just like a tiny bit low, so a little bit hard to hear you when you were
Hello, is
talking.
that better?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. So switching this over to you, Jamie. Here's my question for you, especially with the research you've done in your background with psychology.
Hmm.
I guess what has there been any studies or any research done regarding what motivates someone to buy these items, even though they literally don't serve a purpose? You're not playing the game any better or worse if
Hmm.
you're not wearing a cowboy hat in Team Fortress 2 or anything like that.
Yeah, I don't think that there's been any study, or at least not that I have come across, that is specific to the context of video games, where like they looked at gamers and they said, okay, cosmetic items, like why do people buy them, or does it increase their enjoyment? There might be some stuff out there, but nothing like big studies and big journals or anything like that.
hmm
But if you can look at like other areas of psychology and other contexts where, especially like consumer psychology and the whole idea of like people using possessions and fashion and accessories and all
hmm
that sort of stuff to like signal something about themselves or
hmm
to communicate something about their identity.
hmm
You have like really high identity oriented brands like Apple,
hmm
where people, not everybody, but a lot of people buy, that brand because they want to say, I'm the kind of person who uses like this product.
hmm
And I think that that probably applies to video games as well. It's a very high, involvement hobby. We spend a lot of money on it. And
hmm
if you have like the wacky hat, or if you have a certain like loadout or skin that you want to use to kind of show like, hey, I'm really into this game. I'm into it to the degree where I'll spend money on it, or I, really like this class or whatever it may be, then that those possessions can be used to signal information in that social context about your identity and about things that you value and
Yeah.
what you're into.
Yeah.
And I suspect strongly that people do that, just like they do it with real life clothes.
Your clothing essentially speaks about you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really good point there, Jamie. And I think a really good example of that would be like a game like Second Life, which basically lets you literally create your own virtual persona there. And I know there's money in doing making unique fashion and selling clothes or doing all kinds of unique things that are basically exclusively to you and being able to display yourself in that way.
Yeah, and there's been some research on a lot of research actually on like what motivates people to play games. Just the very basic question of like why do people play games? Uh, and one of the things that people have found out is that the ability to be expressive and to exhibit some amount of creativity and that kind of thing is like a big deal, especially for certain types of people. People vary sort of on how much that motivates them, but I think for most people, generally so, and some people very much so, like the degree to which a game allows you autonomy to do things the way that you want to do them. And that can
Hmm.
sort of be expressed in games in a lot of different ways. Like you could have a different build of your class, or you could, have player housing and decorate it the way that you want and so forth. But a lot of it, I think, can be satisfied by cosmetic items and being able to change the appearance and customize your little person, your little avatar, so that it looks different from other people's and you don't just look like the stock figure. And apparently people will pay money to
Yeah.
do that sort of stuff.
Yeah, I
Hmm.
mean, like look at a game like League of Legends or Overwatch, where,
Hmm.
and if you're playing the same AD carry every game, and I think there's also a little bit of just entertainment out of the norm of board. Like you're playing the same AD carry for whatever reason, you're trying to go through rank, you're just trying to get better at that person, and you really like that character design as far as their skill set, but you don't necessarily aren't too happy about their color scheme. A color change is nice. You just wanted. I bought this because I wanted a different color. You know what I mean? And they offered it, which was
Hmm.
nice. And I think free to play games. I think there's absolutely nothing wrong with them monetizing that. They put the work into it. They put the work into creating the character. They put the work into creating the different color palette.
Hmm.
So I see nothing wrong with them monetizing. Now, and it's in that when you look at a game like League of Legends, where there a lot of the skins you have to buy, you actually have to spend at
Hmm.
your money to
Mhm.
buy those skins. But then you look at a game like Overwatch, and I have to give Blizzard its due. Overwatch has different skins for their characters, but you have to use in-game currency to get those skins. You
Yeah, you
can't just
can't buy them.
you can't flat out buy them. You cannot just go to the list,
Hmm.
pay $5, and it's a direct buy. Now you can pay some money to get loot chests, and then
Yeah.
you might get them,
But it's
or you might
not.
get coins, but
Did he
you might
lock
get
up?
coins.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
I think he's still there. Yeah, he's still talking.
hello.
Are you? Can you see us, Jamie?
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Uh oh. Think we lost Jamie. Oh wait.
Did we,
Jamie,
we,
are you there?
did we just lose
Hello.
him? What happened? Josh.
Yep. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay,
Uh oh.
cool.
I think we lost Jamie. Well, we had to have some. Wait. I'm hearing beeps. We had to
Yeah.
have at least one mess up live. That's the rule. And fortunately, it wasn't on me this time. So I'm glad. I'm waiting for this sign behind me to fall. I know it will at some point while I'm doing this live. It will come crashing down, scare everyone, and that will be like it for the show. But
I think we're back.
cool. So I think you make a really good point there, James, about the fact that I mean they could easily have put charge people for those skins,
Yeah, and
but
people would pay it. People would
uh,
have played it. They would have paid it.
they would have
Would. Oh,
bitched and
easy.
moaned and say I'm boycotting Blizzard. But
Yeah, but they would have paid. They
yeah.
would have paid. They would have paid.
Now Here is now. This is probably two questions I have for you, Jamie. And again, these are topics we could spend who knows how long talking about. But this is one that I'm kind of curious about. Is there been? This is another one of those research-based questions. Has there been anything regarding the difference in value between spending a larger sum upfront versus spending microtransactions over a long period of time? Like, I'll give you an example. Instead of buying a game for $60 new, you play a free to play game, but then over the course of playing that game, you're basically spending $60 or even more on, like, again, like little purchases here and there, whether it's like
Right.
boosts, items, whatever.
Yeah, so it's kind of the free-to-play versus the premium business models, and which one do people prefer? I don't have any research, again, that looks directly at that, but there has been research on kind of how we view free as a price, or like, $0 or your local equivalent. Like, how is that psychologically different from other price points? And there was a really interesting study that I always like to describe where some researchers set up a table and they on like a college campus, and they had people come by and they said, "Hey, we're selling chocolate, and you can either buy like a Hershey's Kiss, the little tinfoil wrap chocolates, which are they're sort of so-so. I mean, hey, chocolate is chocolate, but these are not very decadent. So they say you could buy a Hershey's Kiss for a penny, for 1 cent, or you could buy like this chocolate truffle for 15 cents. And the truffle is obviously much better deal because people expected to get more pleasure out of it. And indeed, like 70% or something like that bought the truffle when it was priced that way. But then later on, they like dropped the price of both chocolates by 1 cent. So the decadent truffle was now 14 cents, and the Hershey's Kiss was free. It was 0 cents. And people's preferences completely flipped. Like that everyone, like 70% of the people preferred the Hershey's Kiss. You wouldn't expect that because the price of the chocolates changed by the same amount for each. And so like the ratio of cost to expected pleasure didn't change, right? But there was something about that zero price that was just much more appealing to people, more so than you would expect from math alone. And the researchers talked about the fact that we are sort of wired, or have evolved, if you prefer, to prefer sure things over even very small risks.
Yeah.
So if you look at like something that costs nothing to get and to try, then there's like literally almost no downsides to that, right?
Yeah.
It's free, it's risk-free. Whereas if you pay even a small amount of money, 14 cents for a chocolate, or in the case of like, a mobile game, like $5, $3, whatever, like there's still some risk that you're not going to get your money's worth there. And so we're sort of wired to prefer the sure thing. It's just the way that we go about, and like the mental heuristics and shortcuts that we use when we evaluate risks. We give much more weight or much more preference to like a no-risk option than we do to even very small risks. And the other thing they said is that a lot of times we prefer, free makes us happy, right? Like a free option is just something that is like, hey, free is good, free makes me happy. And there's something called the affect heuristic where, we substitute the question of does this make me feel good for is this a good deal? Because does this make me feel good is a super easy question to answer, and is this a good deal is a much more complex. Our brains prefer easy questions over complex, so we sort of substitute that question for is it a good deal, and think that, okay, because it makes me feel good, it's the better option, without stopping to think like, well, wait a minute, if we do the math or calculate the expected utility and create a function based, like that's hard, that's not intuitive, and it's not easy to do. So again, the biases and heuristics that our brains have developed to make decisions like that rely on just does this option make me feel good, and free usually does. Okay. So I think that's some of the reasons why people are willing to try a free-to-play game with the possibility even of future payments, and they're much less likely to choose premium games, even if they're only a few dollars.
Okay. You were kind of bringing up a little bit there, Jamie, while you were talking. Did you hear that, James? Like, was he coming a little?
Yeah.
Okay, just want to make sure. All right.
Well, I mean, it makes sense too. I mean, it's one of those. If I'm going to pay money, I want to make sure that I'm paying money to get. I'm usually gonna pay money to make sure I get the best. It's one of those. Even if I'll spend that extra money to make sure that I was going to spend money anyway, so I might as well spend to get the best product versus But if I don't want to spend money, I'm always going to go for the best. If I don't want to spend any money, I'm always going to try to look for free options. It's one of those, as opposed to it's one of those. If I had to spend 1 cent to 15 cents, I think you said, for the chocolates, well, neither one of those, you'd kind of put, even though 1 to 15 is vastly different when it comes to economic reasons, to the average person, they don't really see that much of a difference between 1 and 15. If I'm going to spend money, they look at it as, well, I'm spending money anyway, so I might as well get the 15. It's going to be better. It looks better. It's going to
in for a penny, in for a pound, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yep. Exactly.
Yeah, and I think that is a really good point from both of you regarding that kind of perception, especially with free-to-play games. Like, a lot of people, especially hardcore players, learn to optimize. So they know, I have $3 to spend. What is the absolute most value I can get out of that $3? Am I going to buy, like, a little boost, or I want to buy something that may give me more value down the line? But, as both of you said, and what we got from Chad as well, the idea of free means there is literally no risk. You can do this as many times as you want. And we see this with even in like other genres. Like if there's an option to try something to get a reward and there is no risk to it, you're going to do that. But let's say they want to charge you health, or let's say your in-game gold. That adds that added weight to it. That means you have something you're going to lose. And that changes the script in a manner of speaking.
You're more likely to say no to something if there's if you might fail. There's a high likely, or there's even any likability that you might fail.
Yeah. Now, there's two parts of monetization and sort of like the psychology behind it that I definitely want to touch on, especially with you on, Jamie. I know we are going to be going over an hour after our little 5-minute beginning, probably like the next few minutes. So
That's fine.
I don't want to go like an hour and a half, 2 hours, especially since this is a live video. So the first one I want to ask you about is I'm trying to think of how to properly phrase this, and it's great when I have to stop and think when I'm live. That's even better, because normally on the podcast I can edit this out. Oh good, Jamie got knocked off. That gives me a second to quickly think of something. Wait. Okay, well he's busy trying to get back on. I need to think of this quickly. Hopefully he will actually get back on, or we'll be in trouble.
Yeah, it's showing him loading as if he's coming back.
I wonder if he's having connection issues too.
Oh no, I haven't on my headphones because the echoing was coming from the computer.
But we will finish this up in the next few minutes. Oh, I got a message from... Oh yeah, we dropped the call. How's that even look? That's how it looks on... Alright, hopefully he will actually be able to get back on. How the hell do we... There we go. Oh wait.
I think I'm back.
Yep, I can hear you, just I don't see you. Wait.
There we are.
Alright. It's the joys of doing a live show. For those of you watching this either live or recorded, we spent about 15 minutes before just trying to get sound and the proper resolution over here, right?
I think we got it.
Alright. So the question I wanted to ask you regarding like pricing and that kind of perception, when it comes to, I guess, the consumer itself, is there, as you just said with your example, with the free versus, a penny, 15 cent, whatever, when it comes to like free to play games and pricing, has there been any kind of study or like a general consensus regarding like how much someone is willing to spend at one time? Like again, when we look at a free to play game, we've seen pricing from everywhere from like 5 cents for like an hour boost to they have like those super deluxe edition, super deluxe packages that give you like a ton of resources for $99.
Best value, right?
Exactly. Is there been anything regarding like what the general consumer is willing to pay when it comes to these things?
I bet a lot of those companies, free to play companies and platform holders, have data on that, and they have various breakpoints, and maybe they've put together some profiles for different types of users. But I imagine that's something that varies really widely, not only across person, but across like the game itself. And I imagine that would depend on how the game is structured. Like, are there gates or pain points where kicking out a dollar, makes the game a lot more fun to play, or prevents it from being a pain to play, or being able to pay a little bit of money so that you can keep playing and recharge your energy, so that you don't have to wait 24 hours for your little character's energy bar to fill up. So to the extent that they develop those pain points in and get people to pay, but I imagine that they're constantly trying to balance that against not making people angry, or making people frustrated, or unhappy with their playing experience. So I don't know of any specific research that's looked at like how much will people pay for a coin doubler or any of that
New
sort of stuff.
pad or whatever.
Yeah, but in a world of big data, I imagine that there's tons of it out there, and there are people whose job it is to try to pinpoint exactly where we should be pitching people on the coin doubler or the experience point boost or the extra life or whatever.
I'm definitely sure. I've seen posts like that on Gama Sutra in the past, where people talk about when's the exact time you want an ad to come up, or when you want to poke someone saying, "Hey, share this with your friends, get 100 extra coins," or stuff like that.
Yeah, timing is sort of an interesting question, because there's like some research in the consumer psychology literature that looks at like when to time pitches to try to get people to impulse purchase things.
Yeah.
And there's this whole concept of like ego depletion, which is a concept that's kind of under attack or being questioned in the literature right now. But there's also a lot of research to support it, to show that like we have a certain reserve of mental resources that gets depleted whenever we have to think about something, or whenever we have to make a decision. It depletes that pool of mental resources. And when it gets low, we're susceptible to over-reliance on like mental heuristics and biases, and we make poor decisions, or we're susceptible to like marketing and that sort of stuff. And they've done research where they've depleted people's mental resources, and they make impulse purchases at like a gift shop, or they go through like one of those Dell like configure your own PC like websites where like, I want this motherboard and this memory and this video card, and people who were sort of mentally exhausted like built a killer rig and like spent a lot more than people who were well rested and weren't mentally depleted. So I think there's some interesting research that you could do where like if you pitch somebody on an impulse purchase, buying something from the shop like right after they finish playing a game, when they've depleted some of those mental resources, is that pitch more successful than it would be if it were like before the game or when they first open up the app?
Yeah. And I think that's a really good point. I know there's a study like if you're about when people are like hungry, for instance, they're usually more irritable and easier to provoke than if they're well rested or well fed.
Yeah, it's the same idea. You don't have the mental resources to sort of inhibit your reactions or your emotions.
Yeah, and Kotaki Bone made a really good point in chat about that we are really in the testing stage. Because again, this kind of mobile is really only a few years old. This kind of monetization tactics, and will be interesting to see how things will play out by the end of the decade. Now, we are definitely getting late, and there are so many more questions that we can talk about. So I guess I have one point that I want to make, and then one final question for both of you, and then that will take us, I think, to the end of the live show. So going back to what you were saying regarding pain points, and when a game starts, when they start essentially making the game harder or really trying to push those monetization tactics. For me, I think that's when I typically tend to stop playing a free-to-play game. Like, I played Marvel Puzzle Quest for some time, and it got to the point where either I was spending money to progress, or I'm spending 5 to 10 times longer trying to do anything, and it just got so frustrating. And I think what we were talking about earlier regarding the investment, once you're in, it's easier to get to keep spending. I think that's a very interesting point. Why they keep a lot of the early boosts, early content so cheap. Because once you've spent that money, you now have an investment in this game. And it becomes harder to say, well, if I stop playing, then, the 5, 10, whatever amount of dollars I put into it, goes to waste. Yeah. Like, when I buy a traditional game, I have that value, in perpetuity. As long as I can play that game, it retains its value. But if I stop playing League of Legends, for instance, all those skins I have are no longer, I can't exactly, trade in or get my money back for those skins. They're attached to my account forever, and that money is now lost, kind of thing.
Yeah, there's actually a name for that in the psychology literature. It's sunk cost effect, where you make a decision about what to do in the future based on the costs that you've incurred in the past.
Yeah. And again, we could easily dedicate who knows how many more hours. So here's my final question. And before I ask this, this is probably a good time for you folks watching this live or recorded. Again, Game Wisdom Live is very much a work in progress at the moment. So if you have any suggestions, please let us know. And two of those questions, one is the how long or the length of this. We are, in terms of our recording, we should be just over a little bit over an hour in terms of streaming. Is this a good time for the show? If you'd like to see it longer, if there's enough interest in making it longer, we can certainly do it. But I think if it goes too long, it just becomes a lot harder to watch, video for like an hour, 2 hours, stuff like that. And the other point, the time. If you're watching this record right now, we started this around 8 o'clock. Now, there were some technical delays that caused us to run late, but is an 8 p.m. starting time good for you folks? Would you like to see it pushed back even more? Would you like to see it moved up? Anyway, if you have any comments, please let me know in the comments below, or if you're watching this on chat, be sure to type it in. But getting back to it, here's my final question for both of you. And we'll start with James this time, as he hasn't had a chance to talk for a few minutes.
Oh, that's fine.
But here is the question I have. We've talked about monetization, we've talked about DLC and pricing for a good part of 40 minutes. So my question then is, there's always been this talk about the ethical concerns regarding these kinds of tactics. Obviously, monetization, incentives, stuff like that, they are key drivers when it comes to gambling. I've seen casinos make use of, light purchases or light gambling to heavy amounts, incentives, stuff like that. And there's always this question regarding the ethical concern. Like, these things are obvious moneymakers. Whether it's Pokemon Go or Farmville or Kim Kardashian's Hollywood, you name it. These tactics work, and they bring in big bucks. So my question is that considered ethical, or is it right to use these tactics in a way to get people to spend money, or even we can even make it bigger? Is it right to even get them to play your game in the first place? And again, this is a topic that we could easily dedicate who knows how many discussions to it. But for both of you, I just would like to get your general thoughts on this. And James, we'll start with you.
Well, when you're you're trying to piece together ethics and business,
Mm-hmm.
and depending on what country you're in, that's going to have a whole
Yeah.
slew of different answers to it, and you almost can't answer that question safely.
Mm-hmm.
Because first of all, anytime you answer that question on one side or the other, somebody's feathers are going to get ruffled.
Yeah.
So I would like to plead the fifth on this one. Well, actually, no. Actually, no. I'm not gonna take the easy road out and plead the fifth. I'll walk the track.
Mm-hmm.
So, ethics as far as the business is concerned, there is none. If I can make money, I'm
Mm-hmm.
going to do it. Ethics as far as the consumer's concerned, it becomes a personal
Mm-hmm.
issue. It becomes a personal issue until you start hearing about the stories. And I know Extra Credits has actually done a video on gaming addictions.
Mm-hmm.
And when you start getting into the psychology of what a consumer is willing to pay, and you
Mhm.
start breaking down at what times are they going to pay more, when can we throw this in to get more money, that's when you start. It's no longer just about, oh, let's make a game, make some money over it. You're literally almost warping the human mind to gain more income. Now, throwing out, for a small development company or for a small indie studio, throwing that kind of stuff around lightly is, I'd say it's okay for them, because they're not at the position where they're just trying to survive. They're
Mhm.
doing what any natural creature on this planet would do. They're going to fight, kick, and scratch to try to survive. And if they can use psychological tactics to do that, they'll do it. But for a huge company who's already made its money, who's already made its millions, I would say it's wrong. I think it's wrong, and they need to. And I'm not saying that it's wrong as in they need to stop. I'm saying it's wrong that they need to verbally tell their consumers that this is what they're doing, and then let the consumer make up its mind as to whether or not, now that they're getting the knowledge, they still need to be able to make up their minds as to whether or not they want to continue. Because if the consumer decides this is unhealthy for me and I'm going to keep doing it, then it's no longer ethics don't matter. They're choosing to make that mistake.
Okay. And your thoughts, Jamie?
Yeah, it's a tricky question, and I think game addiction is probably a whole huge separate topic, and psychologists have a very specific meaning, when they use that word addiction. Like, it means something very specific in a clinical setting. Most times when people like you and I sit around and we talk about, like, oh, this game is so addicting, or I'm addicted to this game, it just means that, like, you're really engaged with it, and it's not actually causing harm in your life, and you could quit if you chose to. It's just, in a lot of ways, it's a really well designed game because you're engaged with it. I think that using psychology to part people from their money is not a new thing, and it's not new to video games. Like, marketing has had roots in psychology and fashion and all those other types of things, and consumer psychology is stuffed with studies and theories and models about that. I think people do get a little, like, squicky when you start talking about, like, ways to really, like, get really specific and pinpoint, like when do we pitch an ad to this person because they're in the right psychological state to be susceptible to it. And I think that gets to be a little squicky, but I think that a lot of gamers are really savvy to this sort of stuff, and they catch on and they figure out if a game is going to be worth their time. And I also wonder, like, new generations of players who are coming up where, like, this is the norm. Like, you play games on a PlayStation console hooked up to your TV, old man. What, like, who does that?
I've been called Old Man Bycer by someone for playing PlayStation 2 once.
Yeah. That's just not the way that a lot of younger people play games, and I think that they've grown up with those free-to-play mechanics and they're comfortable with them. there's always going to be a portion who overdoes it and runs up a credit card bill. And those are sort of special cases that we probably can't really get into now.
Yeah, and I think that is a good point about that kind of like when we talk about video games, an addictive game is one of the highest praises we can give it, and that goes with the quality of the game mechanics and the design. I mean, I've played games that are so good that I want to just sit through and get through, just like having a delicious dinner. Like if you're having like a 5-star meal and you want to eat it because it's so damn good.
Yeah.
But when you start throwing in elements again, when you start targeting people directly, that's when things get very sticky, and especially when it's not really giving them a personal value. It's not about making their lives better. It's about basically saying how much more money I can get from them. And that's where, again, this discussion can go in any number of directions, depending upon who's on and what their background is.
Yep.
All right, and again, we definitely went over. I know, even though with the delay with getting things set up, we definitely went over the hour. So we're going to wrap up this episode of Game Wisdom Live tonight. Like I said, if you have any questions or comments about times, lengths, anything like that, definitely let me know in the comments below. And be sure to tune in next Thursday. We'll have another episode. Hopefully, we're going to look for more guest hosts to come on and talk. And I think it was a lot of fun. Jamie, it was a pleasure having you on tonight. Before I let you go, I know when we last spoke, I think, were you writing your book or was it finished when we last spoke?
I think I was still working on it.
Is your book out right now?
Yes.
If you want to give a quick plug for the folks.
Yeah, it's book is called Getting Gamers: The Psychology of Video Games and Their Impact on the People Who Play Them. You can go to Amazon and find it there, or really any online bookseller. You can go to
plug there too.
Yeah, psychologyofgames.com/book and get all the information about it as well. And I have a whole chapter in there about like free-to-play gaming and microtransactions and in-app purchases, for example, where some of the stuff I talked about tonight, and then a lot of other information as well.
Cool. All right, and James, it was great having you on. This is your second time in the co-host chair. How did you like it?
Oh yeah, no, definitely. I'm kind of angry that life hasn't allowed me to do more of these. So, but hopefully we'll see that will be rectified in the future. So you guys will see me a lot more.
Yep, and it's great we got the headset working too, because I know we had some of that echoing issue. So I think we got that taken care of.
Yes, headset.
Yay!
Works.
All right, so we're going to wrap things up here for this week's edition of Game Wisdom Live. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, be sure to share with your friends and, of course, like and subscribe to the channel. If you're watching this live, this will be recorded, or the recording will be up in a day or so. Other than that, thanks for tuning in. Again, Jamie, it was a pleasure hanging with you. Hopefully we can do something like this again, or have you on for a Perceptive podcast once again.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. Thanks for having me on.
Awesome. So, with all that said, thanks for tuning in to this week's episode of Game Wisdom Live. Have a great rest of the week. For those of you watching this either live right now or if it's recorded, be sure to tune into this week's Perceptive podcast. I believe I am going to be talking to Peter from Beta Dwarf about the development of Forced Showdown this week. Very interesting game, so be sure to check that out. Other than that, we'll be seeing you live next Thursday. Again, we're still playing around with the times, and you'll see me most likely tomorrow with another critical thought. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I will see you all next time. And actually, James and I will see you all next time.
Yep.
So, take care, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Good night. Thanks for watching the video, everybody. If you enjoyed it, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel. Leave a comment, of course, share with your friends. It always helps out. Check out game-wisdom.com, where I examine the art and science of games. You can follow me on Twitch and Twitter under GW Bycer for the latest updates of new content. And be sure to check out our Patreon campaign. You can find us on Patreon under Game Wisdom if you would like to donate and help contribute to keeping Game Wisdom going. Your donations can not only give us the monthly funding we need to keep supporting ourselves, But if we can hit some goals, it will mean more great content for you. And there are some nifty little rewards there as well. Thanks for watching this video, and be sure to tune into the next one real soon.